Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us to today's presentation, a Loving More nonprofit presentation, Beyond Monogamy. Our lead presenter is going to be Robyn Trask, our Executive Director, and the life and blood of Loving More. Give us all just a moment here, and actually, let's go ahead and give Robyn a hand as she joins us here.
So welcome. Glad that everybody's here. This is fun. We're excited about this. And Jesus is going to be my assistant on this. He's basically going to be the tech support and fielding questions and may chime in on a few things as well. Sorry, jumped ahead of myself. All right, so basically this is Loving More is wanted to bring these webinars. I just want to start there. We want to bring these webinars to people as a way for people to get information at a few more, in more ways than we're able to do at conferences. We do a lot of conferences. We do a lot of education in other places. But the webinars are providing us a way to reach people all across the country, which we're excited about, and even outside of our own country. So that's exciting. We will be doing this on a monthly basis, and we're excited to see it coming up. It is going to be listed on the Loving More website. The page for the monthly webinars is already up on our website. I'm Robyn Trask. I'm the Executive Director of Loving More Nonprofit, just so you know who's presenting to you. We chose not to, on this presentation, to use a webcam. We probably will for future presentations. The next time we do this, we'll actually be doing it on a different system that actually works better than this one. But since everyone was signed up for this one, we decided it was best to go ahead and use this one. And then Jesus Garcia, our board president, who does all of our IT and is has a full-time IT job and is a volunteer. So he does all of his work for Loving More by volunteer work, which we really appreciate. So let's talk about monogamy and the reality of relationships. This presentation really is basically about what's going on in the world, about relationships in general and monogamy and things like that. And it's really looking beyond monogamy. So we're talking about more than just polyamory. We're talking about open relationships. The reality is that most mammals, most humans are not naturally monogamous. There's a book, The Myth of Monogamy, that talks about this. There's a lot of information, and the more information that's out there, you'll see there's been more and more studies, and the more studies that are done, the more it's showing that people predominantly, that doesn't mean everyone, but predominantly people are not monogamous. One of the funny things I found about this is that when I've looked at, I spend all my time really looking at polyamory. It's kind of, I eat and breathe this stuff all the time and think about it and study it. And so one of the things I found interesting is when I'm coming out with some of the information articles that I'm looking into for this, is that we have had articles will come out and they'll talk about how people are not naturally monogamous, how most people who are professing to be monogamous are cheating, or a good portion of them, certainly not all. And while there are people who are naturally monogamous, what they always conclude with is that while we're not naturally monogamous, we should, of course, strive to be, which I don't really get. It's like they have to go back to that. After all these things about how monogamy isn't really who we are, it comes back to, well, that's really a better way to have a relationship. So that's always been something that's funny. So the studies that they have done have shown that that is simply not our reality. The skills that we need for healthy relationships are the same whether or not we're polyamorous, monogamous, swingers, open relationships. If we want a healthy relationship, we need to know what we want. We need to have honesty with our partners, with ourselves. There needs to be a willingness to move through the challenges and insecurities. What I mean by that one is to really understand that sometimes we're going to come up against problems and we need to be willing to face them, to own our own issues, to know what's our issue and what's our partner's issue so that we can support our partner in those issues and so that we can own our issues in a real way that brings us together to work them out. And then, communication skills and a willingness to learn to communicate if you don't have them. So not everybody comes into any relationship with these skills. And a lot of people need to learn how to communicate within their relationships. An awareness of your boundaries is always a good thing to have for relationships. I like this picture particularly because some of us would not be okay. This would be beyond our boundaries to be bound. Some people would love it. So it's knowing what you want and knowing how to speak up for what you want and to make agreements that you can abide by. I think a lot of times in open relationships, polyamory, people have rules. And rules are always something to me that is like they're set in stone and you can't change them. That's why I always like to say agreements, because agreements are something we negotiate. And agreements are something we have agreed to, not a rule somebody's made for me. So I find that a little better terminology, but if you like rules, then use that. So there are different ways that you can do it. You have to have negotiating skills and diplomacy. There are good ways to negotiate what our boundaries are. And part of that comes from a sense of respect for each other and a way of coming together so that we're talking about things we want, that is, we know what we want, and then we know what we can agree on and what we can't. Sometimes there are things that are real boundaries and, they're not negotiable. For me, I'm polyamorous. I identify as polyamorous, and that's not negotiable. I'm not going to be monogamous. So that's one of my things that's not negotiable. So for other people, it might be that they love swinging, and that's not negotiable. For some people, they're very monogamous, and that's not negotiable. So those are the things we need to know. And then I think compassion for others, understanding that a lot of times when we're relating with people and when we love people, we're triggering abandonment issues, we're triggering things inside them. And so we have to have compassion for some of the things that we might be triggering in our partners as we're relating to them, and a compassion to sit with them through some of that. And then, of course, a sense of humor. And if you're in an open relationship, calendaring is so important. You've got to know how to use a calendar and a day planner and how to plan your time because you're often negotiating that with different people, and it's always a good time to make time for yourself. So these things are all important in good relationships, regardless of where we stand on that spectrum. Monogamy is a valid choice when it's a choice. And what I say by that is we have our culture that has compulsory monogamy. So monogamy is something that we are programmed for and told that's the only one true way to have relationships and have it work. And for those of us who may not fit in that, I don't know about other people, but I really struggled with that. I did try monogamy. I really failed at it. I was not a very good monogamous person. However, I have a really good friend of mine who has been monogamous with the same person and truly monogamous in that she has never been with anybody but her husband. They have been together for over 30 years, and they have a very happy, very loving, highly sexual relationship, and they're very happy in that relationship. So monogamy does work for some people, but it isn't right for everyone. And that's what we're here to talk about. Some of the myths we have about monogamy is that it's natural. If it were natural, not so many people would have trouble being monogamous. I think that's one of the things that I've heard said is that if something's natural, then it comes easy to us. Monogamy for many people does not come easy. Many animals are monogamous. There are a few, but very few actually. Monogamy is more civilized. The one I love, only in monogamy do you find deep intimacy. And I've actually been told this by people I love and care about and who even respect the fact that I'm poly. But they look at me and go, well, I just don't think there's any way to have deep intimacy with more than one person or even with one person if you're seeing other people. And I went, well, that might be true for you, but it's not true for me. What I've actually found is the more open I am and the more connections I have with people, the deeper my intimacy in my relationships has gotten. I have an incredible intimacy with the people that I'm involved with. I have 3 partners right now, and the intimacy with them is pretty profound. I couldn't have imagined the deep relationship that we have. Monogamy is the foundation of relationships since early history. This is totally not true. We find a lot of polygamy and other things in the Bible and other places. Polyandry is practiced in other places in the world. There are many places that do not practice monogamy. There is one thing that we do find, and that is in the Western culture, that monogamy for women has definitely been the norm for the past 2,000 years in Western culture. Men weren't expected to be monogamous, but women were. And so that is something that we've shifted away from. If you really love someone, you never want anyone else, or you never fall in love with anyone else. Now, I know for some people, they can only be in love with one person at a time. I've actually had people look at me and go, well, I understand loving two people, but you can't be in love with two people at once. Well, I actually find for me, I fall in love with, it seems I fall in love 2 by 2. I always seem to fall in love with two people at once. It's a kind of strange thing that happens with me. Even when I'm in a very strong relationship and I meet somebody new and I'm in an NRE, it always seems that I fall more in love with my partner I'm with when that new relationship is starting as well, if I'm falling in love with somebody. So that's always seemed to be the case for me. And, you know, different people experience it differently. So, and besides that, I sometimes think that the falling in love, the new NRE, which is new relationship energy, is something that people kind of, it's a chemical reaction that we get carried away with. And so that's something we have to keep in mind when we're talking about new relationships and falling in love anyway. And then monogamy is the only valid option in human relations. Now, there's a lot of people who are going on about this, especially right now with marriage equality being a big issue, because, of course, polyamory, open relationships, polygamy are the slippery slope. New relationship energy. NRE is new relationship energy, if somebody didn't catch that. And so that's basically the feeling that we get when we meet somebody new and they're wonderful and shiny and their farts don't stink and we think they're great and we love them and, oh, we can't wait till we see them and we get all fluttered, and that's NRE. And sometimes it's really challenging when your partner is in that because you can't really reason with a person in NRE very well. It's kind of a drug reaction. The other thing is that I hear this a lot, women want monogamy. You know, all women want monogamy, and if they don't, there's something wrong. They don't like themselves or they're insecure. I see this a lot when I see articles on polyamory or swinging where somebody's posted, well, these women have low self-esteem. I've actually found the opposite to be true in open relationships. Women who are practicing open relationships by choice and because they want to usually have very high self-esteem and really like themselves. So that's a very interesting thing. And then monogamy equals commitment. Commitment is an agreement between people to abide by certain agreements. They're committing to something together. And that can be anything. I used to get this a lot early on, and when I was in first opening my relationship up, well, I shouldn't say first, because my first marriage, we were open from the beginning. We did not open a relationship. We started open. We didn't know how to do it. We didn't know there was a term polyamory. We didn't know about swinging, and we had no clue how to do it. So we were very clueless. But we made a commitment and agreements and vows in our marriage, and they did not include being sexually faithful. And we chose that consciously, and we had to argue with the Unitarian Universalist minister who married us. In fact, we went around about this for almost a month with him before he finally agreed to leave it out. So this was a while ago. This was about 25 years ago. So, you know, things like that have changed some. Questions to consider. If you're considering this, if this is new to you, and you're considering whether or not this might work for you, open relationships, whether it be polyamory or swinging, you know, have you ever been in love or romantically in love with more than one person? If having multiple partners was normal and acceptable, would you consider it? Strongly consider it? Do you want honesty and real intimacy in your romantic relationships? You know, and what are the choices that you have in relationships? Monogamy is certainly a valid choice. Polyamory is a choice. Swinging is a choice. Open relationships. And they all fall into these different things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what the different terms mean in a minute and what I mean by these different terms. But it's really important, I think, for people to consider what their choices are and what's right for them and what have their thoughts been about it. I know for myself, as a young girl, I I found myself fantasizing often, even like when I was in first grade or kindergarten, and there was always two boys that I liked. And I liked boys a lot, so. But it seemed to always be two, and I would actually fantasize about being with both of them. And it was only recently that I really realized that, wow, I've actually been this way all my life. And it's not that that's new, I just didn't know there was options. So open relationships are very varied. They can range from polyfidelity, group marriage, and that means people who are faithful within that group. It can be 3, 4, 5 people. I even know one polyfidelity group I used to that was 20 people. So it can fall into a big range on the polyfidelity. They can also be casual sexual encounters. So open relationships, so some people have open relationships where they're either married or they're part of a couple, and they choose to have sexual encounters outside that relationship. And those are certainly choices that people can make. And that works for some people. And some people will have, I have a friend of mine, she referred to it as door ajar monogamy, which means that, you know, if you happen to be at a retreat or away for a weekend and, you know, you get the opportunity for a sexual encounter and you want to take it, that's okay. You know, and so, but, you know, while we're here in our home, in our hometown, we're monogamous. So there are different ways and styles that we can do. Polyamory is one in which people have romantic relationships both based on being real, open, authentic, and honest about it, where everybody's consenting. Swinging, and we're going to talk again a little bit more in depth about these, but swinging is usually, not always, but usually couples going together and participating in sexual encounters with other couples. And then there's a lot of gray area between. But they do share this idea of honesty, commitment, and full disclosure with all the partners involved. And so, you know, good communication is one of those keys to good relationships. The myths of open relationships. People who have open relationships are never jealous. I'm sure people in the audience are going, oh, I am jealous. For a long time, I didn't have jealousy, and then I did, until I did. And I often say when people come to me, well, I've never been jealous. I'm like, well, hope that you can say that 10 years from now, because for me, it just hit me by surprise. I really had never dealt with jealousy, and it just kind of knocked me upside the head one spring day, actually. Open relationships are more evolved. They're not. They're just another form of relationship. And like all relationships, they're as good or bad or evolved as the people who are in them. Open relationships are all about sex. Some are not. So it really just depends on the relationship. I love this one. Open relationships are all about men having harems or men getting as much sex as they would like. This is so not true. And one of the things that I think is a big fallacy of this one is that we think that all men out there, and at least especially in our U.S. culture, we have a tendency to think that all men out there are trying to get laid or want to get laid, or that's all they want to do. I was recently at something. I've spent so much time in the poly community that I sometimes get tainted. So I was at an event that wasn't all poly people. Actually, there was very few poly people. And they were all talking about, you know, all men want to get laid. And I'm like listening to them going, well, that's not my experience. But, you know, okay. I didn't really say much. Swingers and or polyamorous people are promiscuous and willing to sleep with anyone. This is not true. We're very picky. So some of us are very picky. I actually have a friend of mine who has a T-shirt that says, I'm a kinky, polyamorous switch, bisexual switch, and no, I still won't sleep with you. People who are polyamorous or swing lack commitment. This is one of my favorites because it takes a lot of commitment to make these relationships work. Open relationships take a great deal of commitment to our agreements, to our partners, to honesty, to being real with them, to being authentic, and to knowing what we want. These are not easy commitments to make, and it takes a real deep commitment. Open relationships are shallow, which this goes back to that intimacy thing we were talking about, that only monogamy has intimate relationships, or you can have intimacy and monogamy. Some people who have open relationships are shallow, just like some people in monogamous relationships are shallow. So it really is not, none of these are really true. And then people who open up a relationship end up unhappy. And this next slide actually comes from our recent survey, which the results will be being released in a couple of weeks here. This is happiness. This is among self-identified polyamorous people. But, you know, a large degree, you know, there's just a small section there that you'll see that people are not very happy. Most people in open polyamorous or swinging relationships are very happy, at least in what studies that have been done. Now, this one here, my caveat on this is that this was from a survey that was done by Lovingmore. And so it's a survey. So these are self-identified and people who chose to answer the survey. So maybe if there were people who were unhappy, they wouldn't answer the survey. And we don't know that for sure. We hope that they would, because we want the information. So defining swinging. And again, this varies. This is kind of, you know, these are not to box things up into packages, but just to give people the spectrum, because there's so much gray between some of these ideas. But swinging, and I actually was taking this from a swinging website. Swinging is defined as couples in committed and casual relationships engaging in social sexual activity with other couples outside their relationship. I used to refer to it as wife swapping. It's also referred to as the lifestyle by a lot of people. And a lot of couples engage in the activity as a couple, but some will swing individually. So it varies. And it can be casual, and some people spend and make lifelong friendships with their swing partners. So it's not as casual as people think it is always. Sometimes I know it's like Lovingmore events, which are polyamory-focused events, people can get a little bit like, well, this feels like more like swinging because somebody's having a play party in their room after hours. That's, you know, certainly their choice to do so. And what they don't understand is the people coming to that play party, they've known each other 25 years, all of them. You know, like, they've known each other a long time. These are old lovers and friends. They figure they all get together and have fun, you know. So the perception, we can perceive things because we have such sexual shame in ways that may not be the reality of what's going on. And swinging runs a gamut from people who are very much wanting to be friends with people and connected to them to people who really, one of my friends put it this way, she swings because it's like having a sex toy for the night. And that's how her and her husband think of it. They're going out to play with sex toys. So the people are very objectified to them. And so there's a big wide. One of the things that was recently interesting was at the Alpine Erotica, which my business partner participated in. He was teaching there, and he was talking about one of the things in swinging that he just observed at this particular meeting was that the people who were younger tended to be more interested in building friendships and connections, and the older people who were swingers, these were all swingers at this event, the older ones were much more interested in, I'm here to get laid. You know, where's somebody I can fuck? So, you know, so that was kind of an interesting observation, I thought. Polyamory, again, we talked about it, but it's romantic relationships with more than one person. It's loving relationships. It means polyamory, means many loves. So there's been some controversy in the polyamorous community about this. You know, that a polyamory is an umbrella term for all open relationships, and I would disagree. Now, people disagree with me. I don't care. That's fine. Take it how you want to. I think open relationships is the umbrella term that polyamory, swinging, and a lot of other things fall under. But polyamory, the term was created, actually it came from things like the term loving more and from polyfidelity, and was created by Morning Glory Zell. And I believe it was 1990 or somewhere around that time frame when she had used it in an article, and it just took off. It's called Polyamory, a Bouquet of Lovers, and that's the article. It took off from there, and it was actually put into the dictionary in 2006. So they can come in a lot of configurations. They do encourage trust, communication, honesty, authenticity, and they often share a desire for making agreements and for having, you know, the openness to be able to explore while having the safety of a relationship and agreements. So those are some of the things that we found common in polyamory. So polyamory versus swinging. There's a lot of people who think they're so broad and they're at one end of the spectrum to the other, and they're really not. There's so many people I know who are involved in both communities who are polyamorous. One of my partners identifies as polyamorous but also swings, and he says those relationships are very different. I identify as polyamorous. I do not swing. I explored it a long time ago and found it really wasn't suited for me. So different people, but I know a lot of people who do both. And I know some people who are swingers who just they want to make sure that it's clear they're not polyamorous. And then you'll have people who are polyamorous. No, I'm not a swinger. That's not swinging. So people get a little miffed by some of this. And I think it's just that they want to be understood. And I think some of that comes from wanting to, with polyamory and especially, it's such a new term. And swinging's been around a little bit longer. The term, the lifestyle and swinging has been around a little bit longer that people understand it. So I think people think of polyamory and they think of swinging. They think people are wife swapping and having casual sexual encounters, when for most people identifying as polyamorous, that's not what it's about. It's about having long-term relationships, or even short-term relationships, but relationships nonetheless. I always say it this way: I may have one-night stands, but there's always the potential for a loving relationship. When I go to bed with somebody, it's because I have a great connection with them, and I'm hoping it's going to turn into something long-term. It doesn't always, but it'd be nice. Of course, if it always did, I'd be in trouble. Again, some of the common ground that you have between polyamory and swinging and other open relationships are grounded in honesty and consent of all people involved. They are often open-minded and enjoy connecting with people. And they can be in any age and varied backgrounds. The people who answered the recent survey range in age from 16 to 92. So it can be a large range of age in the communities. Some of the relationship styles, we talked about polyamory, we talked a little bit about polyfidelity. Polygamy is a really misunderstood term. Polygamy means multiple spouses of either sex. What we often refer to as polygamy in Mormon and Islam are actually polygyny. And polygyny, which is basically a man with multiple wives. Polyandry is a woman with multiple husbands. And so whenever I talk to the press, I always like to clarify to them these terms, because I think it's important that we not confuse them. And then social polyamory is a term that some friends of mine, Daryl and Nancy, came up with. And basically that is somewhere between swinging and polyamory. They have sexual partners that they form long-term friendships with, and it's kind of polyamorous, but it's kind of not. And so they came up with social polyamory because it was kind of between swinging and polyamory. I thought that was an interesting term. I liked it. Things like group marriage, plural marriage basically are the same thing, but plural marriage is often referring to the Mormon, again, polygamous marriage. Group marriage, there's also something I didn't list here, line marriage. If anybody's familiar with Heinlein, and he had the interesting books and stuff where he had line marriages and stuff, and so there's a lot that you can learn about that too. And hopefully we'll actually have a presentation that talks about that in depth coming up in one of the webinars. Serial monogamy, this is what most people in our culture are practicing. Most people are not, like my friend, truly monogamous. They're going from one relationship to the next, to the next, to the next, which isn't real monogamy. It's kind of, I don't know, serial monogamy is the way we put it. Networks, there can be networks of lovers, whether that's a swinging network or a polyamorous network or an open relationship network, but there's usually an interconnected, and it can be made up of all different configurations. And then open marriage or open relationship, which is just somebody who allows, it can be a polyamorous, it can be swinging, or it can just be open to, you can casually go out occasionally with other people. It can vary so much. And then we talked about swinging. These are some of the commonly referenced terms. Now, a lot of these come from the polyamory, from our website. But, excuse me, some of those we deal with also in and swinging, and some of these are made-up terms because we don't have our language. One of the problems with language is that we don't have language sometimes to describe some of the things we're talking about in these kinds of relationships. So primary, secondary, and tertiary, these are some of the most controversial terms in polyamory. In swinging, you would have your primary relationship with your partner, you live with the person you're a couple with, and then you'd go out and have play partners with other people. In polyamory, primary can refer to all kinds of different things. And that's the challenge, is that, see, I use that term in that Jesus and I are in a primary partnership. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean I love him more than my other partner, or that my other partners aren't important to me or as important to me. It simply means for us that we live together, we own property together, we have a family. My other partners don't live with me at this time. And we are totally open. Some people think primary means, and for some people it does mean this. Primary is nobody else is important as the two of us in this couple relationship, and everybody else is secondary. And for us, that's not the case. That's not our choice. We know that we're open to other people, male or female, possibly coming in as a primary partner to our relationship that would be, be part of a group relationship, group marriage, whatever you want to call it. So we're open to that. Secondary relationships, my partner Ben in New York is a secondary relationship. And for me, that's because, not because I don't love him very much. I do love him very much. I don't know that I would ever be able to live with him. That's one thing. He has a partner he lives with. They have a child. They live a very different lifestyle. He lives in New York City. I could never live in New York City. So there's some things that are just so different with us. I don't see us ever necessarily being in a primary relationship. But that doesn't mean he's not a very important part of my life or a very important part of my family. And so you really have to figure out where people fall in those terms for yourself. So never take, somebody tells you I'm in a primary relationship, ask them to tell you what that means to them. It's really important to be inquisitive and ask questions. Tertiary, maybe relationships that people weave in and out of our lives, maybe we don't see them very often. Then there's things like jealousy. Jealousy is a thing that we often deal with within both swinging and open relationships, but we deal with them in monogamy too. I don't know if anybody's ever had the experience of being jealous of their partner's friends, or their partner's job, or their partner's golf game, or whatever it might be. Compersion is a term that was coined, I believe, by Carista Commune, and it was a term that kind of means the opposite of jealousy. It's where I feel really grateful and kind of, I don't know, not proud is not the right word, but it's the closest one I can come to. Like when I see my partner with somebody else and I go, oh, I'm so happy for them, And I remember my husband years ago calling me up and telling me that he was making out with somebody in the kitchen. I was at work when he was telling me this, and I liked the woman he was with, and he was wanting to just be honest with me about what's going on. And I get this big grin on my face, and everybody at work's going, what are you so happy about? My husband's making out in the kitchen with somebody. I'm so excited. It's really hard to tell people that. Safe sex, this is another term that gets very confused. When you talk about safe sex, you don't want to just ask, do you practice safe sex? You want to know what they mean by safe sex. It's very important. Most of these communities are practicing very safe sex practices. And I'll show you we have a little bit of information on that. Fluid bonded in polyamory is where you're fluid bonded within that partnership. It can be two people, it can be more than that, but you don't use condoms. And I remember at one point I was fluid bonded. There were 5 of us who were fluid bonded. We weren't all primary partners, but we all went and got tested together before we became fluid bonded, which was exciting. We all want to go we're getting 5 of us STD testing together. Let's go. So people look at you strange, but that's okay. And then you've got other things like triad, which is where 3 people in a relationship, or V-triad, where there's a hinge person who connects the other 2. And the other 2 may be friends, or they may be involved. They're not involved if it's a V-triad, but they may be friends, or they may not be. Quad can be, 4 people in a relationship, and they can go up from there. Metamor is an interesting term that's come out more recently in polyamory, meaning my partner's lover or partner. And rather than saying my partner's partner all the time, my metamor is a little easier to say. Solo poly is people who are single, practicing polyamory. They could also be solo swingers. There are people out there who are swingers and don't really want to be involved in a relationship living with somebody. And they're extremely happy being single. They're different. And then intentional family, that's people coming together. These are some of the things that I think are radically changing the way we look at things in our world, is that people are starting to talk about intentional communities, intentional families, as something, and being a family of choice rather than the family I'm born with. And so they're choosing intentional who they want to be with. And then cooperative, sustainable relating. This is a term I kind of like because really what happens in our world right now is that we go on so much on autopilot because we haven't been taught good skills for relationships. And so when I use the term sustainable relationships or sustainable relating, I'm referring to the ability to talk out our problems so that our relationships can last. Whether they continue as a romantic relationship or whether we have to change to a friendship with somebody. Most of the time when I'm like in a relationship, I want to remain friends. Or when we're getting a divorce, we want to remain friends. So especially if we have children. So these are good skills to have no matter where we are with somebody, to learn to sustain those relationships. Just because we're not lovers doesn't mean we're not in a relationship with people. Polycule, I'm going to show you one of those in a minute, so we'll come back to that. And then network we talked about. And then sex positive is a term that we use a lot, and that's just people who are trying to put forth an idea of not being ashamed about sex, but being more positive about the pleasure and the joys that we get out of sex. And certainly one of the things that people, yes, polyamory is not all about sex. Swinging is not all about sex. It's about fun and joy. But sex is involved in all of these relationships. And so it's important to feel good about our sexuality. So this is a sample polycule. Now these names are not all true. This has got myself and Jesus and Ben on here, but the rest of them are kind of made up names. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of, and it was actually David Hall who came up with the term polycule. I thought it was really cool and kind of fun because really when you look at the relationship, this is often what you'll see when people start describing their relationships. Some of the benefits of swinging relationships is that they can be empowering. They give you a community, sexual exploration, and great intimacy. They can bring spice into a couple's sex life, a chance to explore our fantasies, and fulfill unmet sexual needs. There have been times when I said I'm polyamorous. There have been times when I really wished that swinging did work for me, when I've had unmet sexual needs that I could possibly get met that way. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work for me. So the benefits of polyamorous relationships, authenticity, personal empowerment, community. I have found that to be really important for me, is the sense of community I get from the people I'm connected to. I love going to polyamory things because I can really talk to people. I can talk to them about my boyfriend, and I can talk to them about my partner that I live with, and all of these things that when I go into a room that isn't part of poly community, they look at me like, did you say your boyfriend and your husband? What? They start wigging out, So I like being in a community where I don't have to worry about that. Support for more intimate connections. One of the things I found, I've been in the polyamory community a long time. And I also know that I found people said this is true of the swing communities for them. But when I was going through my divorce and having a really hard time with some things, some mental illness and some other things going on in my family that were really challenging, and when I was going through this, if I hadn't had the community, I wasn't actually sexually involved with anybody at that time in my community, but the community was there for me and supportive, and I got touch needs and other needs met that I might not have had I not had that community. It was extremely important. I find that polyamory, for me, can be a great source of different emotional, intellectual, and spiritual and sexual needs. So I can get different needs met with different people. Not one person has to fill all of my needs. Abundance of touch. I love that. I like to be touched. So exploring love, intimacy on many different levels. One of the things I really found interesting for me was that I had a relationship with somebody where I loved him and I cared about him. We were deeply intimate friends, and probably more than friends, but we were not lovers. Even though he lived with me and slept with me, and we snuggled all night nude, we never kissed, never had sex. And it's one of those gray areas of relationship that was really sweet and really wonderful. I also had a 5-year relationship with a woman who I considered a primary partner, and we were sexual only during the time that we were a triad with my husband. And when she and my husband split up, it was just actually, and then me and my husband split up, so it was just me and her for a long time, and we would joke we were looking for a good man to come between us. But because I consider myself bisexual and not necessarily bisexual. But she was still a love romantic partner, an intimate partner, even though she wasn't a sexual partner. So, and we snuggled and cuddled, and it was great, and I loved her very much. So there's, and there's so many different people you'll find in these different walks of life. And I love this particular picture. Is on the cover of one of our magazines, and I had a guy who was a minister. He picked it up at a book fair, and he's looking at it, and he looks at me and goes, "They're having an orgy." I went, wow. I said, that's really interesting. He said, number one, last I checked, you need to take your clothes off to have an orgy. That usually helps. But I said, number two, we were actually doing a healing on someone. So it's amazing where the mind goes with things. Oops, we went one too far. So, yes, there's downsides. So some of the challenges of open relationships, one is learning to be honest. This was one that I thought, somebody has to learn to be honest. But I remember years ago I was at a meeting with Ryan, who founded Loving More, and I was having a lot of challenges in my relationship. My husband hadn't been totally honest with me. And she looked at me and she went, Robyn, honesty is a learned trait. I went, oh, really? That was an epiphany. So that was something, people give people a break if they're new to this or they're not sure. Honesty takes time to learn. We've been trained to say, oh, no, I didn't find that guy attractive at all. Not at all. As we're drooling over him, or we swoon when he walks in the room. No, I'm not attracted to him. I'm weak in the knees. But you don't notice that. So that's one of the things we have to learn. Learning to let go of ownership. Now, this is not necessarily true in swing relationships or even in polyamorous relationships, but I think that it really helps in both to let go of owning. One of the things I say about the reason I'm polyamorous is nobody owns my heart and nobody owns my sexuality. That's mine, to share with who I want to share it with. Now, I do it respectfully, and I respect my partners, and I take their advice, and I talk to them because I trust them. But they don't own it. I do. I think isolation for polyamory, sometimes there can be an isolation when you're in a quad or a triad. I have seen them tend to insulate themselves because they've got their own social group, and they don't really, so they stop getting the extra support. And I think it's really important for all of us in relationships, whether we're swinging or polyamorous or in open relationships, to have community or other people who can support us outside of our relationships so that we have people we can go to when we're having issues. Fighting with more than one takes skill and takes practice and communication and how to deal with issues that come up. The pain of losing more than one person. I've had that. I've lost 2 relationships in 1 week. It sucked. Luckily, I had another one who was holding me and letting me cry on their shoulder. And dealing with, and we talked about this earlier, but dealing with and owning your issues, owning what's going on for you, knowing what are your issues. One of the things that I think is great in my relationship is that we actually we'll talk about things like our inner 2-year-old coming out, which means we're being triggered, because that's when the inner 2-year-old comes out and throws a fit. So that's helped us a lot. One of the big questions is STDs or STIs. That's my little gif of safe sex there. Many people believe that those who swing or are polyamorous are open. have indiscriminate sex with no thought of safety. That is so not true. I find that, you know, I don't know, many of the, and some of this I've only heard. I've only been to one play party myself, but the play party I went to had gloves, they had condoms, and they required that everybody use them, even if you were in a fluid bonded relationship. They said, it's just to be fair to everybody and just to keep everything neat and clean, everybody uses the prophylactics while they're here at this party. That's your agreement to being here. We do recommend that people who are in open relationships get regular testing. That is annual testing. If you are sexually active with more people, you're going to do it more often. And we have a question. STI is sexually transmitted infection. It's also referred to as STDs. It used to be STD was the common term. Now STIs are becoming the medical term they're using, is sexually transmitted infection. Use condoms with non-fluid bonded partners. There are people out there who recommend you use condoms with everyone. And so that's something to keep in mind. Understand the risks, responsibilities of having multiple sexual partners. It's really important to be honest about your status and what's going on with you when you're with people, and to know the people you're with. And that is because for me, condoms are one of those things that make it safe for me to have multiple partners. And I have to be really upfront and honest, because every time I have sex with somebody, I'm putting other people at risk. I'm not just putting my fluid bonded partner at risk, but I'm putting my other partner and his other partners, and it can really grow. So it's really important that we're responsible, at least in my opinion. Who has open relationships? They come from all walks of life, all different sexual orientations. They are doctors, therapists, you know, computers, a lot of computer techs, let me tell you. A lot of therapists, school teachers. You know, I know several friends of mine who are school teachers, and they have to be very quiet about their lifestyle. They're very underground because in fact, one of them teaches at a Catholic school. So she has to be very careful. You know, there are salesmen, construction workers, circuit court judges. You'd be amazed at people. But people from all walks of life. One of the things that I saw that was really good was, if you've seen the show, the Lisa Ling show on swinging, she did the show on polyamory, which was really good, and you get definitely 3 different groups. But what I really liked in the swinging is that she showed people from a really big variety of socioeconomic background, which may not be as true in polyamory. So we're talking about the safer sex practices. This graph here is from the Loving More 2012 survey. Okay, that's, you know, how many people have been tested for HIV. Now, in the regular population, it is nowhere near this. Many people have never been tested. The recent research, and this is a research study that was done in Conley, found that safer sex practices are significantly more prevalent and open, and that's versus people who are cheating. People who are cheating are not practicing safe sex. And so that is just an interesting thing when it comes to talking about STIs and open relationships. So the diversity of people is very far and wide within the polyamory community, and the age range. This happens to be polyamory, but it's the same in the swing community. I just love to have a lot of different diversity, because you can see the different age groups and the different ethnicities. One of the things that we do see, at least in polyamory, and I don't know if this is true in swinging, and actually if I can ask, when I ask this, you can let me know. There's somebody here who might have that answer for me. But I know that in the polyamory community, for Loving More, most of our events predominantly white people. That's slowly changing. But when we did an online survey a couple of years ago, now this was not the 2012 survey, this was just a Loving More survey that we did that was for our own needs. But we did take the demographic of the people answering the survey, and we had 2,500 people answer the survey, and we did ethnicity, and 25% of the people answer the survey were African Americans, which surprised me. I was like, wow, how come we're not seeing them? And I don't know, I still don't know the answer, but that's changing. Our last conference, there was far more African Americans than we've ever had at a conference before, so it is shifting and changing. and there's a lot more Hispanics, so it is changing. I still haven't seen many Asians, but you know, so it is changing though, and the diversity is growing. Is that true in swinging too, or?
I think it depends on the geographic area.
So it depends on the geographic area. Yeah, 'cause I know in Philadelphia when we were doing our conference there was another event that went on that I can't remember the name of it, but it was like the Black Rope or something like that. And that was a totally black swing group, totally African-American swing group. So it was interesting. Education levels, this is from the 2000 survey, and this is religious affiliation. This is polyamory. And one of the things is that we did find both in the 2012 survey and the 2001 survey is that there's a much higher level of education among polyamory. I'd really be interested to find out if any studies on swinging have been done this way. And if anybody knows of any, please let us know. Huh? I think part of the reason that you see that change or that shift is because people who are more educated are more open to possibilities. I would guess that that's part of it. But also the people who answer the survey are answering the surveys, like the 2001 survey, that was actually all done by hand and handed out to people. So it was started by college people. It was done by a college, so it may have been handed out to more educated people to begin with. And a lot of them were from Boulder, so I know that, and from like Berkeley and stuff like that. So that may have hit. But even the new survey, which was online, we had over 4,000 people answer, still had that ratio, although the master's degree was the most common. So, but there was a much higher level of education. So children and swinging, you know, this is another one. What about children? In the swing community, at least what I have found and what I've talked to from some people I know who swing, is kept very separate from their children. Their children often don't know they swing. They keep the activities away from home, or if they bring it home, their children aren't there. So it's not like they're having sex parties in front of their children at the house, which I think has been shown in some cases in Hollywood. They show it that way, and that's just not really the way that the swing community operates. So many of them are very committed parents, and they're very committed to keeping their sex life separate from their children, just like anyone else is. So that is something that you find also in the polyamory is different, because polyamory is much more family-oriented. So most poly families, their children know they're polyamorous. And when they don't, I've seen it become a problem, because you're not just going out and having sex with somebody, you're actually having relationships which affect the family dynamic. So I do think it's important, if you possibly can, to be open to talking to your kids about polyamory if you happen to be polyamorous. And if you're having relationships that are important to your family, then I think that's something that's important too. One of the things there is an ongoing study right now being done about children in polyamory. We don't have the results of that study yet because it's ongoing. But my observations and other people that I've talked to, kids have benefited pretty well with polyamory because of the honesty that they're being modeled and the communication that they're being modeled. But just like any other relationship, the more balanced the parents are, the better off the kids are. And so these are just a few slides I'm going to show here, because we're going to be moving on to questions here in a second, of like events that, most of the events that I put on include children. We have a family camp out, and some of our other events don't, like our retreats and stuff. And so we're going to we can start going ahead and asking questions here. I'm going to put up some slides here that give you resources. Yes, you can switch it to an active chat now. What I would like for you to do is to keep yourself muted until Jesus calls on you, which he actually has my name on his thing. So until you're called on to ask your question, please. So the question is, can we access the slides later? This presentation will be available online with the slides.
Which website?
We'll get the URL out. We're not sure yet. We're going to try and get it onto the Loving More website directly, but we're not sure that we can. That's one of the reasons we're going to use a different system next time, because we will be able to do that. We'll have more control. So does anybody have any questions so far on this? Now, these are the sources for swinging that I came up with. Again, I'm not the expert on swinging. I do know a lot about it, probably more than an average person. And I wanted to definitely include this because I think it's important. But there are other people out there with more information on this, and these websites have some good resources for you. As far as information on polyamory, there is so much information that wasn't there 10 years ago on polyamory. There's things like Modern Poly, there's Loving More, and there's a lot of other websites out there with information. Every community has it. Now we have a resource page. It is not live right now because we just opened our new website and we have to update these pages before we go live with them. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks we will have our resources live. But Modern Poly has a really good resource list of local poly groups and communities if you're looking for them. Also, Loving More is starting Loving More chapters, and they're just getting off the ground right now. If you're interested in anything like that, let us know. You can email us and ask us about those. There's also Polyamory in the News blog as well. So does anybody have any questions so far?
Okay, so I have a question from David Denver.
Okay, David. So do you want me, if you want me to ask this question, I can do this. Okay. Out of curiosity, how many people are attending this meeting? There's not much of a community. Okay. So how many people do we have attending this meeting right now? About 37 at the current time that are online and in person attending this meeting. Meetings can vary depending on where you're at. Yeah, that's fine. Just let them know how to unmute the mic.
Muted, and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
There you go. So did somebody have a question? They should be able to unmute themselves now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, good. So I have a couple of questions. I'll start with a hard one first. I have a friend of mine that's kind of going through this with me, and her question is, what is the difference in between having a deep friendship with someone versus being in a poly relationship?
Well, that's really as you define it. So, you know, that's one of the things that I think there's some gray areas that we have to define ourselves. Is it a loving relationship? Do you consider it a romantic relationship? Or is it simply a deep friendship or friends with benefits? And all
well, I think you can have deep friends and you can love your friends, but is it necessarily, I wouldn't call it polyamorous myself, and no, I don't think it's specifically sex-related.
So it depends. Like I said, these are self-definitions. You get to decide whether something's an important relationship in your life.
Okay. The second question is, I noticed you mentioned something about being in a long-distance relationship with somebody in New York. I am also in one with someone from Baltimore, which is difficult.
Yes, it is.
It's great in this modern day and age where you can text and email, but any hints, suggestions, recommendations, tips?
My suggestion for you is to, first of all, there's a great book that it's a little hard to find, but I know somebody recently found it, called The Idiot's Guide to Long Distance Relationships. It has great tips in helping people with relationships who are in long distance relationships. Also, it's important to make time for each other, and things like Skype dates and stuff like that can help.
Exactly.
I have a long distance partner who is actually in Hong Kong. So we
holy shit! I was in Baltimore.
Yeah, we haven't had a in-person meeting in more than 12 years.
Wow.
I'm hoping that this summer that's going to change. I'm hoping.
See, I'm dealing with 3 months. I'm done.
Thank you. Let's go on to somebody. Okay. Question from Elizabeth. You know, I can't speak to did you actually record that question so we heard it? No. Okay, so the question is, have you noticed much in the way of May-December relationships? And I'm not sure what she means by that, so I'm going to ask for clarification. Oh, is that what that means? Thank you. Older, younger, thank you. I haven't really noticed it, but then I don't always personally notice those kinds of things. Maybe people have. I do know that for me, the age of differences don't matter as much being in poly relationships. For me, they don't. Age seems to not matter as much since I'm not always looking for somebody to have kids with or do certain things with. So I have seen pretty wide age ranges in poly relationships. As far as the swinging versus polyamory in the terms of sex positivity with children, it varies. I've seen people in the poly community who are very sex negative with their kids. I think it's something that we all need to work on as a culture, not just poly or swingers, but everyone. So I think that it can be a challenge. And then we have another question here from Wendy. What is a good age to inform your children about your open marriage? Again, Wendy, it depends on whether or not, first of all, it depends on how important those relationships are in your life, whether it's a sexual relationship strictly or if you actually have relationships with people outside your primary or whatever. But I think that if there's somebody who's important in your life and they're going to be attending family events or family outings, things like that, that children should know as soon as you can inform them. And they may not, like my kids grew up in polyamory, so they don't, there's like at one point it kind of dawned on them that we were different, and they started asking questions, so I talked to them about it. But my oldest was 11 and my boyfriend was coming out to visit, and so I wanted to make sure he knew that I think kids are perceptive. I didn't want him to think I was having an affair, so I sat him down and talked to him about it. And that was, I wish I had talked to him about it before that. And I've had many people tell me when they talk to their teenagers, they're really glad that they did so. Okay. Okay, so one thing that seems to be missing, I'm going to read this question. One thing that seems to be missing, I can keep up with it. Okay, one thing that seems to be missing in a lot of poly literature is what is the responsibility of network members to the well-being of all others in the network. For instance, if a person is feeling insecure, they can get reassurance from their partner, but ultimately it is their issue. And the partners are not responsible for providing reassurance to that person unless they happen to feel close to them. What I'm getting at here is that the idea of community that's providing support and well-being to others in the community is not just about whether you happen to like other community members. And I actually think that it depends on what your agreements are within your relationships. So if you're agreeing to a group relationship, then I think that the commitment needs to be to the group and that everyone in that group needs to be supported. But that can be challenging too, because you've got to do that within a certain amount of reason. And without knowing the specifics of a situation, I've actually worked with people who have 4 or 5 people involved, and one person is just being extremely difficult and is triggered by issues that are running much deeper and won't go get help for those issues. And so you have to look at it from different sides. But I do think it's important that we all consider how each other is feeling in our relationships and how we connect those relationships as far as, let me take an example here. I know a group where people wanted to have a fluid bonded relationship. One of the people had opened up to a new relationship and she wanted to be fluid bonded with that person. And it was a group. One of the people in the group was like, 2 of them were fine with it, but one of them wasn't. But she was never actually consulted, and I think that was very inappropriate. She should have been consulted and talked to. Even though the 2 men in the situation were fine with it, they should have found as the other person was as well, and that all people should be included in those kinds of conversations. So I don't know if that totally answers your questions, but hopefully it helps. And I do think that it's really important that if you're in a group where there's a triad, a quad, or 20 people, that you keep in mind that the well-being of everybody is important in that group and that they're cared for.
I have one more question, David.
Did I miss it?
No, it's an audio question. Go ahead.
Okay, David, go ahead. Okay. So if you can, you can also type your question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. My question is, in the community that I'm in, it seems like, and my girlfriend and I talk about the fact that in the polyamory community, it also combines a lot of fetishes, S&M, and that type of thing. We're not more of an openness in that. We should just try to get used to. Is that kind of the norm?
Well, I think that if I understand what you're asking about the high level of people who identify with other things like kink or BDSM or sacred sexuality and other things. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So, one of the things is that for me that's helped is to be able to know that I can compartmentalize those a bit. So I'm not a kink or BDSM person personally.
Neither are we. That's
several,
normal.
Yeah, several of my partners are. So, well, not several. One. One of my partners is, and he also goes to play parties, and he participates in the kink community and stuff. And so he just doesn't talk to me about it. It's like he's very respectful of me. I had at one time had a partner who was very much into the Japanese bondage and absolutely drove me crazy wanting to tie me up. I want to tie you up. I want to tie you up. I finally went, I broke up with him. I'm like, I can't do this. This is not my thing, and you're not respecting that boundary. So I think it depends on how the people are treating you as well as how you treat them. I think it's important to respect that people like different things and that we all have different things that we like, but also not to try to push it in somebody's face when they say, yeah, that's really not for me. To respect them at that. And then if they change their mind, trust me, they'll come and ask you about it. If they're really saying no because they're afraid of it, they'll probably come back, 6 months later and go, well, I'm kind of getting curious. You seem to always have a big smile after going to a dungeon, So, but that's one of the things. And the other thing is that, it doesn't also hurt, if you're open to it, it doesn't hurt to sometimes check things out. I did check out BDSM and found that it wasn't something that was good for me, or that I really liked. I have so many friends who do it, and actually I sometimes really recommend it for clients. So it's really about being open to other possibilities for people and understanding that they have their preferences. As long as they're respecting you, then I think that's important too. Okay, we are over a little bit, so we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to go ahead and stop. Okay, okay. Okay, so I have another question from David, from another David. Being that polyamorous is different for each individual, being that she, well, somebody's having problems with their audio. Mute someone. Everybody muted, thank you. Hold on, stand by for a second. We're still back feeding me. Okay, now we're good. Thank you. Thanks for our tech guy. Being that polyamorous is different for each individual, being that she has been openly poly for decades, yet he is new and has only recently come out as being poly before it was something secret and hidden, which made the relationship self-destruct. How does one go about defining what they have? I'm not really sure about that. And because I'm not really sure what the question is that you're asking on that, David. Is there a way that you can clarify I think that maybe what you're asking, and I'm going to answer it a little bit and see if you can clarify this for me, but one of the things I find is that just because we identify as polyamorous, we could be coming from it from very different perspectives, and we need to figure out what is the right way for us to do that or approach it. For example, with my husband and I was very open polyamorous. I wanted everybody to be involved, not necessarily sexually involved, but I want everybody to be friends. I want us all to be able to hang out and watch TV and have parties together. This is important to me. For him, he didn't want that. And so that was a very different thing. So we finally got to where he wanted a don't ask, don't tell at all. I mean, he didn't want me to meet his partners. He didn't want to meet my partners. And I found that that was very difficult for me, and we couldn't find a middle ground on that. And had we been more informed, we may not have ever chosen to marry and do everything that we did. Not that I have regrets about that, just that we didn't have the information at the time to know that there's different ways to do poly. And there's different ways that we can come into either swinging, polyamorous, and all of these types of relationships to find what works for us. Okay?
When is the next webinar?
When is the next webinar? Here, let me get to the... I missed some of my slides as I was going through this. So I'm going to go ahead and put these slides up for each for a second, but the next webinar is coming up. I've got the date here on this last slide, so give me 1 second and we will get to that. There it is. Upcoming webinar is June 20th, where topics will be decided. We have one scheduled for July 16th and for August 14th. And we will have different presenters. I'll be presenting some of these. We will have different presenters doing different topics from different places, actually. So it's going to be fun. So do we have any other questions? Oh, I see somebody asked me about recommending BDSM to clients. When I worked as a sacred sex teacher working with people, there have been times when I've come across people who are dealing with sexual abuse, and working with a sex therapist friend of mine where we work together with clients, there were times when we've actually recommended BDSM as a healing modality for people who have dealt with sexual abuse. It can be very useful. And it depends very much on the person. But being able to be empowered in that way, in some cases to relive the abuse but be empowered to stop it, was extremely powerful for people. So it can actually be very healing. Yes, there is a place to find poly-friendly relationship therapists. Actually, the Loving More website has a poly professionals listing. All of the professionals listed there are Loving More members, meaning they're very familiar with polyamory. But if you want specific recommendations from myself, I am willing to do that. You can call us. And our number is 970-667-5683. So thank you all for joining us. We hope that you decide to become a Loving More member, as these webinars will be free to all Loving More members. And you can become a Loving More member, donating member. Starts at $10 a month at our website. And we thank you for joining us. Have a great evening.
Attendees are muted.
Are you ready? Are you ready?